Welcome to EHO Knows. In this episode, I get to meet someone who I've always thought was a total legend when it came to food safety. For years, I used to watch or read Bath Blog, and finally today I get to interview Dr. Douglas Powell. So thank you very much for coming along onto EHO Knows.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
The amount that you know and the amount that you've written on in terms of food safety and food disasters is absolutely amazing. And so what I thought today is I'm just going to rattle off a whole bunch of foods and tell me when or where some major food poisoning outbreak has happened. And so really what we're going to do is just show it happens everywhere, but a bit of a test of your knowledge, and it's going to be an interesting insight into the world of food poisoning. So let's start with low-hanging fruit, sprouts.
Raw alfalfa sprouts or mung bean sprouts or even bean sprouts. They're served on every sandwich, even at hospitals in Australia. And they're responsible for outbreaks almost every week somewhere in the world. The biggest one was in Germany in 2011, in which 53 people died and a couple hundred got sick from E. coli 0157. And what happens is the sprout gets contaminated as it's forming, and you can't wash it off. And washing sprouts is something people don't do anyway. Now, in Southeast Asia, they blanch or cook the sprouts because they know not to eat any raw vegetables. But in Western cultures, we want things minimally processed. So that was the big outbreak, and that was shocking at the time that it was just so large and so dramatic. But they happen every week.
What made Germany so big? How did it scale so large?
Well, the seed was imported from Egypt, it turns out, because a lot of Europe, their south is Spain and northern Africa. And so it was imported from Egypt, and that initial seed had become contaminated. And then it was just served in sandwiches and at cafes and restaurants all around Germany. And it wasn't cooked.
How long between the start of the outbreak and identifying the cause and shutting it down?
Oh, it would have been months.
Wow. And
they notice an uptake. There's surveillance systems which monitor people being sick. But to actually identify a microorganism, you have to provide a stool sample, which is inconvenient, and a lot of people don't like to do it. So it takes a while.
yes.
But that's the blue thing of people like environmental health officers and inspectors and disease detectives, we call them. That's what they're supposed to do, and they figured it out.
And in this case, coroners. And a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay, so sprouts. The old favorite, rice.
Rice is problematic because, like a lot of food, it's grown in the ground. And people don't realize that potable water is really a fairly recent invention. It's only 150 or so years old. Back in the Roman times, they didn't feed water to their slaves. They fed them wine because it was fermented to get rid of all the disease-causing organisms. And the outbreaks of cholera in the 1870s or so, that's when that famed epidemiologist Snow in England, he put a tap on the local well because there were so many people dying of cholera and they were getting all their water from a local pump. And just through basic epidemiology, I mean, they didn't know about microorganisms, but he figured out everyone was getting it from going to this common pump. So he put a lock on the pump and it disappeared.
Yes.
So there's these I don't know if they're accidents, but we know a lot more now, and we can do DNA sequencing and identify the bug and make it more specific. I'm not sure that makes us more knowledgeable, but it helps provide solutions to problems that are out there.
Okay, so any really, really big rice poisoning outbreaks?
There have been many. In fact, I had one myself when I was in high school, grade 12. And it's very common to go to a Chinese restaurant and you order rice. And it was back in the 70s, and people used to leave Chinese food out all night. Well, because it's grown in the soil, it accumulates something called Clostridium, which is a soil-borne bacterium that is also a spore former. And that means it's resistant to boiling. It is not neutralized until you get to 120 degrees Celsius. And that's why we have autoclaves and things for petri dishes and hospital instruments. And if you leave it at room temperature for anything more than 2 hours, those spores will germinate and that stuff grows. And it will make you very sick very quickly. So the only thing you can do is refrigerate. But back then, people didn't remember that. And when you go to a Chinese restaurant, you never know what they're doing with their rice. I mean, with acknowledgement to your EHO friends, I don't really like going to restaurants that much anymore because I don't know what's going on in the back room.
Yes. So how bad was the food poisoning then?
Oh, I was on the toilet every 20 minutes for 12 hours. It's not a lot of fun, but when you're young, you can handle it. When you're old, it'll kill
Yes.
you.
What I find amazing about this, and this is probably a big take-home lesson for EHOs, of all these outbreaks, and there's ones that have killed or hurt hundreds of people, and the one you remember most and the one you lead with is the one that impacted you directly. And so we can be as academic as we like, and we can talk about, hundreds of people have had food poisoning, thousands of people have died from this, bang, bang, bang. But the moment it's you who's excavating your bowels on the toilet or your guts up, that's...
Many dictators have known that statistics don't matter. It's when it comes to you.
Yes.
And when it comes to foodborne illness in the West, we've decided that one is too many. And if it's your child that gets sick or an elderly relative, that's too many. And you want answers.
Yes.
How did this happen?
And so what we want to do is be taking the food poisoning message from, statistics out there and trying to make it personal and saying, hey, you don't want this to happen to you. You don't want it to happen to your customers. So, yes. Okay.
Well, and people learn from stories. They don't learn from facts. You embed the facts in the stories, but stories are what gets people's attention. And if it's personal, then that's all the better. I mean, Socrates figured this out. You have an appeal to logic, you have an appeal to emotion, and you have an appeal to fact.
Okay, there's just a soundbite to advertise EHO knows for next time as well. But once again, it's a really good point because we can talk about the science, but it's the story that people remember. Okay, so sprouts, rice, chicken.
Chicken has been associated with a lot of problems over the years. And in fact, the reason I got to do my PhD was because my supervising professor had migrated from the UK, and the then UK ag minister had said that salmonella was endemic in UK poultry, and she got fired.
Okay.
And so he was sympathetic to the emotion argument and how public perception can run with things, even though scientifically she was correct. And there are still problems even in a lot of Western countries that say salmonella is not in the eggs. Yet we know scientifically it is. But government, especially in Australia, is reluctant to acknowledge that, even though the science says it's there. And people, you hear these stories like, well, this is the way my grandparents cooked it and I never got sick. Well, you don't really know that unless you take a stool sample, unless you can link it to an actual practice. It's just sort of passed off as, oh, I have the flu. Well, the flu is actually a completely different disease. That's a lung disease.
Yes.
Whereas gastrointestinal is your stomach. And you're pooping and barfing and sometimes die. So chicken, and up until very recently, it was quite common to wash chicken. You would take a whole chicken, and that's because they used to have feathers sticking out of
Yes.
them. And it wasn't that long ago. Now we just go to the store and buy a chicken. And by washing it, the cross contamination of that tap water hitting the surface and being aerosolized and spreading around the kitchen is actually much worse than not washing it at all and just cooking it and making sure it gets to a tip sensitive digital thermometer verified degree, which in chicken is about 75 or 71 Celsius.
Yeah. I've actually seen photos of hand basins in kitchens filled with raw chicken being washed. And you go, okay, let's just double down.
Yeah.
Let's just splash it everywhere, but let's, cross-contaminate with our hand washing facilities. So that one was absolutely horrific. Plug for episode 1 was the egg that took out an entire restaurant and gave about 100 people food poisoning. So if you haven't watched that one, head back to episode 1. But yeah, so chickens, eggs, just an absolute classic. What's probably been the largest food poisoning outbreak due to eggs?
There's been hundreds. There's currently one in the U.S. state of California in which 60 people are sick. And a lot of this has to go back to watching the movie Rocky, where he drank raw eggs. And people say, oh, yeah, that's good. Lots of protein. Well, yeah, and lots of salmonella. So, and biologically, we get old and our immune system, it doesn't matter how fit you are. You can run all you want, do whatever. Once you reach about 55, your immune system starts to decline. It's a biological metric that can be measured. And by the time you're 80, you've got nothing left.
Yes.
So I used to talk about eggs and would say cook them, but then when you even crack an egg open, you get that little dribble and it's like, oh, cross-contamination. I hate the phrase cross-contamination, by the way. I can't find anything snappier. But I mean, the stuff's everywhere. And it's just mind-boggling that people now consider it easy. So I used to talk about eggs, and now that I'm 60, almost 63, I'm using frozen liquid pasteurized egg whites because I don't have to worry about cross-contamination. I don't have to worry about them not, whether they contain salmonella or not, while the policy wankers debate it.
Yes.
I just take it into my own hands, and that's about the only thing you can do. And I found them at Kohl's once I asked around.
Yes. Yes.
Because they're not particularly common, but when you ask, they'll point you in the right direction.
Yes. Once they search and ask 5 people where it is. So, okay.
Yeah.
So chicken, eggs. How about beef?
Beef, we have a culture of eating raw beef for whatever reason. Whether it's steak tartare in France, there's a Japanese dish which is also raw ground beef, and they're baffled at why they get outbreaks. It's raw beef. That's
Yes.
why. And steaks are essentially sterile on the inside if it's a proper steak and it's a muscle cut. But it's the outside that becomes contaminated during the slaughter process. So you have to sear the outside to kill off whatever's there, but the inside can be pink or at a lower temperature. But when you grind beef to make hamburger, you're putting the outside on the inside.
Yes.
So that means you have to cook all the way through. And that mistake has been made over and over and over and continues today.
We've got all our gourmet chef programs where they're showing pink hamburgers on the inside. So it's now trendy to have half-cooked hamburgers, which is great if you're making it fresh, but not so good if you bought the mince 3 or 4 days ago.
Okay, there's a couple things there. First of all, fresh is irrelevant. What does fresh mean?
Hopefully less time between it being slaughtered and hitting your plate.
But it's hamburger, the outside's on the
Yes.
inside. So it's there. And the other thing is color is a terrible indicator
Yes.
for whether it's safe to eat or not. And this was work done at Kansas State University in the early 90s or late 80s, I forget, which showed that 30% of hamburgers that were deemed pink inside were actually safe to eat. They had reached the sufficient temperature. 30% that were brown inside were unsafe to eat.
Yes. Okay.
They had not reached the sufficient temperature. Color's a lousy indicator. It's subjective like anything else. The only thing you can rely on is a thermometer. That's your data.
Yes.
And without it, and fast food chains have figured this out, and they make stuff idiot proof so you can have a teenager flipping burgers or whatever. But my eldest daughter started working at the coffee shop at the local hockey arena. And I said, "Do you make hamburgers?" Because I always like to act stupid and ask dumb questions or what people think are dumb. And she said, "No, we're not allowed to. We're only allowed to deep fry stuff
Yes.
and serve coffee." I said, "Well, the oil can be hot, so be careful."
Yeah.
I said, "Why aren't you allowed?" And they're not allowed to cook hamburgers because it's just someone handling it and someone getting in touch with it and not cooking it properly and all the myriad of bad things that can happen.
Yes.
Fast food has idiot-proofed a lot of it, from the supply chain all the way through to the way they cook things. And that's why it's generally safe.
It also helps when your hamburger is about 3 millimeters thick and it's just woof, woof, rather than a decent patty.
Well, that depends too. A couple of the big outbreaks in the US were on kids'
Wow.
meals, where the hamburger was like that. And it turns out the fast food chain was deliberately undercooking them because of customer complaints.
Like,
They said, "We want our beef not to be so cooked."
yes.
And what happens with those small patties is the edges curl up and provides an insulator to the inside, so it doesn't reach the high enough temperature to kill off the bacteria.
And they cook one side, it curls up as a clamshell, they flip it over, and then it's only the rim that's then touching the hot plate.
That was found out in the 80s, and McDonald's and the other chains changed the way they cook burgers.
Wow. Yes.
Just to avoid lawsuits, primarily.
Yes. Okay, next one, fish.
I have a motto: raw is risky. Whether it's seafood, beef, chicken, eggs, whatever. I had to go to a Christmas dinner last week at a Chinese food restaurant, and I said, I don't really care what I get as long as it's cooked.
Yes.
So it was cooked thoroughly, whatever that means. I mean, you can't take a. I do walk around with a little thermometer in my knapsack, but by the time it gets to your table, you don't know if it actually reached temperature beforehand or not. So it's not much use. But a lot of food safety is really faith based. And you mentioned those celebrity cooks, which I think are a terrible source of misinformation when it comes to food safety. And in fact, the most popular paper we ever published was in 2004. We looked, the Food Network was taking off in the US and it had all these celebrity chefs, and they were complaining about inspectors and things like that. And my father, who didn't really know what I did, but he knew I did something to do with food safety, he said, you watch these cooking shows? They're always complaining about inspectors and they're doing stuff wrong. So here's me and my father talking about how to make turkey stock and make it safe and all this stuff. And he's telling me, watch these cooking shows. So we watched a bunch of cooking shows, I had some students do it. And they found that a food safety basic mistake was being made about every 2 minutes. And the Food Network in Canada called me and said, we're entertainment. And I said, yeah, I get that. You want to entertain, but you can at least embed the facts. And they said, oh, well, we'd like to work with you. And they called a few more times. And then about 6 phone call, it was on speakerphone with about a dozen lawyers.
Wow.
And they said, if you ever say anything again like that, we'll sue you.
Wow. Okay. But yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't mean much.
Yes. Yes. We like your input, but yeah, don't do anything that makes us look bad.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So there's just a lot of mistakes being made out there that are fairly basic. It's like teaching your kid how to drive a car, right? You think you know how to drive a vehicle, so you teach your
yes.
kid. Well, all you're doing is passing on all the bad habits you have to the kids.
Yes.
Better to get an outsider in.
Having been to some countries, which I won't mention, when you end up with an entire population that drives like that, then you know you're in trouble. And so, yes, but that's it. We basically pass on what we know. Okay, so worst fish-borne food poisoning outbreak.
Right. We're talking about fish. There's been a lot. When I was first in Australia, I got the chance to go to Dubai to do a review of a university graduate program with another professor from Australia. And because it's Dubai, they took us out to some fancy meal. And it was all raw seafood. And this guy was a microbiologist who did raw seafood. And he said, don't touch any of it. He said, the ocean is a human dump. It always has been. So are rivers. You got to cook it.
Yes.
So there's been some major fish-borne outbreaks, usually related to raw. There's always outbreaks with raw oysters. The most famous one was in 2011 or maybe earlier in the UK with one of your favorite celebrity chefs, Blumenthal, who has this little restaurant in the UK, the Fat Duck. And he only serves 20 or 30 people a night, and you got to reserve for a year and ahead. And he made 500 and some people sick with norovirus.
Wow.
And it turns out, and I mean, foodborne outbreaks are never just one cause, they're a culmination of things. And it turns out they were getting customer complaints, but they didn't act on them. Their staff were getting sick, but they didn't act on them. They didn't report it to the local health inspectors. And when they finally did, they went in and said, it's norovirus in your raw oysters. And then the chef turned around and said, well, that's because they're dumping raw sewage in the ocean.
Yes.
And my response to that is, you're the chef. It's your responsibility to know where you're getting the stuff from.
Yes.
If it's coming from raw poop, you better know
Yes.
that and take steps to avoid it. And I don't know who came up with raw oysters as a food group anyway. They must have been really hungry.
Yes. Yes. Oh, it's just totally bizarre. Okay, so fish, relatively easy. I'm going to pick something that hopefully is not going to be a cause of major food poisoning outbreaks. Let's go with something safe like bread.
Well, no, it's not a cause of outbreaks because it's cooked.
Yes.
So that kills off the bacteria and viruses. It grows moldy over time, but that's a fungus, and that's a quality issue. And there's a big difference between quality and safety. So there's a yuck factor there, but it's not going to kill you or make you sick.
Yes.
So bread is relatively safe, again, because it's cooked.
Yes. Okay, so it's the line between what's a potentially hazardous food and what's just something that's going to be foul to eat. Oh.
Yeah. But Western culture wants more foods that are minimally processed, raw if you like. And that's why we have these advisories for women who are expecting a child. Do not eat any refrigerated, ready-to-eat foods like deli meats, smoked salmons, any of those, because they can contain listeria, which is a bacterium, which happens to grow at about 4 degrees centigrade in their fridge.
Yes.
And it also produces a toxin which crosses the placenta and induces stillbirths.
Yes. I'm expecting my first grandchild in the next week, and talking to my daughter-in-law, she's first child, so she's avoiding absolutely everything. Meanwhile, she's talking to mothers who already have children, and so then happily munching into all these things. And the line of argument is, I've did a little bit last time, nothing bad happened, so therefore it's basically a free-for-all this time.
That's the way my grandparents did it argument.
Yes. And so, yeah, total misunderstanding of probability. And so, yes, if I can do it once and it hasn't killed me, then I can do it as many times as I like.
That is a poor understanding of statistics and probability.
Yes, yes.
Because you can do lots of things many times, and that one time will catch up with you.
I walked across the road without looking both ways, and I got to the other side. So from now on, I just walk across the road without looking.
I was talking this the other day with a person here whose kid was learning to drive, and he never looked over his shoulders to check the blind spot. And I said, well, when I was a kid, we always had to. And today's kid is like, well, we have mirrors and we don't have to. I'm like, don't rely on that. Look over your shoulder.
Yes.
And when my kids come to Australia, I tell them, cars don't pay attention. You have to watch out for them.
Yes, yes. So nowadays they'd say, oh, cars do pay attention and we live in a whole new age. But having said that, something always sneaks on through. So, okay, really obscure one.
And of course, the biggest risk is not eating at all, because that'll kill you.
Yes.
So people will make do and do all sorts of weird things. But as I've said, in Western cultures, we've decided one is too many, and we take what steps we can to reduce that risk.
Yes. But at the end of the day, we still have to eat, and there's always going to be an element of risk. Okay, let's go for something really, really obscure. Chocolate.
Chocolate was thought not to be a vector of foodborne disease until fairly recently, because bacteria need water activity to grow, so some moisture. And chocolate was regarded as a low moisture food. But there have been numerous outbreaks now that, I mean, this is what happens. You get outbreaks, so people start looking, and then they find out, oh, yeah, that's what it
Yes.
was. And then a lot of cases of salmonella linked to chocolate. And whether it's in the manufacturing plant or in the process that it goes through or whatever, it's showing up. And it's not as safe as you want it to be. I was never a fan of the dark chocolate. I don't really like. I'm all for the milk chocolate. It uses pasteurized milk,
Yes.
and that's fine.
Yes.
I don't eat much chocolate anymore anyway, but
Yes.
whatever.
I'm hoping to have a guest on who will talk about a chocolate food poisoning outbreak in the UK. And the cause of it was probably the most obscure thing. And it was purely being on site to seeing this event happen that then suddenly explained why you had a, you know, 1 in a 1,000, 1 in a million chance of having a block. But if you have one of those blocks, you are history.
And that's common in outbreaks of foodborne illness, and why EHOs and inspectors are so important is because it's being on site and seeing what actually happens. That's when the pieces come together. And we always use the phrase, be the bacteria.
Okay.
Think about where that bacteria can go and where it's going to flourish. And when you do that and you approach these things, like there was an outbreak on rock melon or cantaloupes in the US a dozen years ago. And it wasn't until the inspectors went on site, and I mean, 20 people died or something. And what happened was, first of all, rock melons have a very soft shell, and the bacteria are very easy to go inside. So you can't wash it off. But this particular grower was using a conveyor belt that had previously been used for potatoes.
Okay.
And, you know, he's a farmer, and he goes, oh, I got this conveyor belt. I'll just throw the melons
Yes.
on it. Because they put them in a dump tank to make them look shiny and clean for the consumers. And that's where the salmonella was coming
Yes.
from. Conveyor belt. So, yeah. And that wasn't put together until the person went out and saw
Yes.
it. So there is a role for gumshoe detection in all of this.
Yes. Okay, talking about gumshoes, we will finish with our last one, water. What could be risky about water?
Everything. Like I said, potable water is only 150 years old. It's been a huge source of disease. There's been a lot of outbreaks involving a parasite, Cryptosporidium. I was in Milwaukee in the early 2000s that sickened hundreds and kills a lot of people. And it got into the water supply. Now, the most famous one was in a town called Walkerton, which is about an hour and a half north of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. And it was E. coli 0157 got into the municipal water supply. And I had a friend. I mean, the national news was broadcasting from Walkerton, and helicopters were flying over all the time, transporting people to London to the medical facilities. And my friend was a dairy farmer on the edge of town, and he lived across the road from the farmer who was implicated. And the water guy actually tried to blame the farmer because they found an old well on his farm. And lots of farms have old wells where you need water. You just dig a hole and then you forget about it. Well, it had rained, so it washes all the poop into the well. That gets sucked into the city system. Well, then it turns out that the water control guy was sort of a drunk and was adding chlorine based on smell, not using any kind of test, and just sort of did it when he wanted. And there'd been a lot of spring flooding, and all these people got sick. And I was very active at the time and served on the inquiry, and it was amazing. They initially were shipping bottled water to the area because they thought that's what people needed. But no one bothered to tell them, don't brush your teeth with that water. You're contaminating yourself. Don't shower with it. And that wasn't until weeks later.
Yes. My in-laws have
some bright pediatrician picked up that this kid had bloody diarrhea. Like an infant. And bloody diarrhea shows up in infants because they're wearing diapers. And when you get blood in a diaper, you go, oh, something's not right. And she went, I know what that is. It's E. coli 0157, which attacks the kidneys.
Yes.
And then works its way through all your organs and kills you. And so she reported it, but it took days and weeks for word to get out, but locals know what to do and they figured it out. But there is a gap that needs to be filled, and that's people on the ground that need to do that.
Yes.
The voice heard, as much as ugly as the repercussions might be, you still have to stand up and speak out.
Yes. So in this particular case, it was contamination coming from agriculture, getting into the town water supply, combined with someone who wasn't quite doing their job, combined with lack of communication, slow communication.
All the factors contributed.
Yes. So when you talk about somewhere like New Zealand now, let's just pick on New Zealand because that's
they've had a lot of outbreaks of crypto in water.
But they've got the problem that their two big industries, cows, we're not going to make any sheep jokes anymore, but cows and tourism. And now they've got the problem that they've got so much cow poo on the hills washing down into their beautiful, fresh rivers. And so now you've got a conflict. Which one are you going to go with? Let alone the environmental health impact of, well, wait a minute, someone's going to be drinking that water further downstream. And so an interesting conflict.
Well, in Canada, we have a disease called beaver fever. And that's from when people go off in the north and go trapping. And they trapped all the beavers for their pelts and shipped them off to England and whatever. But no one really thought, where are they pooping?
Yes.
And they were pooping in the rivers. Well, they would go down to the river and drink the water. And end up probably with crypto.
Yes.
We call it beaver fever.
But then you go into Thailand, I remember seeing recently, where you still have people living right down on the water and then washing in the river, pooping in the river, everything in the river. And then going to the floating markets where they're then pulling fish. They're breeding fish, then pulling it out so that you can eat fresh fish, prepared there in front of you.
Yeah, fresh doesn't mean a lot.
It adds a new layer of organic to, yes.
Oh. Organic is not a food safety system. It is a production technology, and we investigated this maybe 20 years ago. And they're so worried about chemical contaminants that they forget microbiological basics. And their argument was, well, we have so many good bacteria, it outcompetes the bad bacteria. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Yes. Yeah,
So I think organic's a huge ripoff, but supermarkets and retailers will market whatever they can do to make a buck. And to me, food is 21st century hucksterism. It's no different than Magic Men in the
yes.
late 1900s.
And at this stage, we'd just like to thank our sponsor of the EHO Knows podcast, Woolworths, the fresh food people. Yes. I wonder if that one will lay in. They're not a sponsor, by the way, and we're not making any derogatory comments about Woolworths, but it did make for a really funny joke. Yes. Okay.
Well, you're funnier than you think you are.
Yeah, tell my wife that. Okay, so that's probably a really good place to finish up this episode because we're about to do a double one. And in the next episode, I want to talk to Doug about his history, but bath blog. Like anyone who read it, we will explain to the Gen Zers what a blog is. We will, in the show notes, also explain what newspapers are and other obscure things that will be referenced. But in the next one, it's going to be looking at how one person can, over a lifetime, be educating, making a difference, and we'll cover the highs and lows of doing that. But for this episode, thank you very much, Doug, for passing the quiz with flying colours, demonstrating that it really doesn't matter what you put in your mouth. There's risks involved, but we still have to do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.